Love podcasts, hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo! In one take.
Oh, we're getting applause from the gallery.
Yeah. Thank you.
That seems like they like us better than the main three.
Were they not applauding for the main three yesterday?
No idea. I don't watch the podcast. Laura, a stranger on this island. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you feeling to be back from Dublin, where you were shooting something?
I was shooting something, but I mean, I was there mainly to see my family.
Okay.
And I just decided to hit two birds with one stone.
You couldn't stop working.
I couldn't stop working. You could tie me up, gag me, and I would still try to work. Dublin was great. The weather was fantastic. The people are fantastic. And yeah, I was interviewing somebody. Maybe we can talk about that later on. But moreover, I came back to the UK to find out that foreigners like me are no longer welcome here.
Well, shall we chat about what we mean when we're saying that?
No, let's not go into any detail whatsoever. I don't feel welcome here. Yeah.
So Keir Starmer yesterday, ahead of the immigration white paper being released, gave a press conference and he said this line, which has picked up a lot of traction, especially from the left of his party. He said, "We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that works forward together in relation to immigration." And Zara Sultana picked that up quite quickly and compared it to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. In particular, they were comparing that line to Enoch Powell saying they found themselves made strangers in their own country. Was Keir Starmer referencing Enoch Powell?
No,
No.
I don't think he was. But, so, island of strangers and strangers in their own country, I think if you were giving a good faith interpretation to Keir Starmer, it's this thing of, one of the aspects of the white paper that he was kind of going strong on social media, at least, was the government's plan to force people to learn how to speak English.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad idea for a country to, if you're coming to a country, you should be learning how to speak the language of that country, and it accelerates and encourages integration. Again, good faith interpretation would be, if you are divided along lines of language and culture, you are strangers. You find it more difficult to to connect with your neighbor. However, the Enoch Powell stuff is very different to that, So look, there are similarities to it, and it is kind of like, I guess we can get into more detail about what it evokes, but whether the intention was to be an Enoch Powell-esque line is a different thing.
It is interesting that both Enoch Powell and Keir Starmer have referenced this idea of strangers and strangeness to do with immigration, but whether it was a deliberate reference to Enoch Powell or not, what definitely was deliberate was the choice of rhetoric and language that Keir Starmer was using to announce this white paper, which was like the language of crackdown and strangers and being tough on immigration. And I think what we have to be clear about is this white paper was introducing reforms on legal migration. So it isn't to do with perhaps the sort of migration that we see in the media and that people get very angry about, which is the small boats crossings and the asylum hotels. The measures that are being proposed in this white paper has nothing to do with that. But perhaps listening to a lot of the news coverage and the coverage from the Starmer government themselves, you might not be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? That the people that are being targeted here are not the people that reform are generally talking about, or the Conservatives have been talking about for the last 15 years. But to use that language when talking about, it could be people that have been here studying and then have found themselves happy to stay in the UK, working, living, maybe finding a spouse, maybe having children. Not necessarily in highly, like it's not all nuclear scientists that are here from different countries. You're talking about those, and it's interesting how like the narrative shifts when it comes to immigration in this way, that you're now using the language that Nigel Farage uses every summertime when he goes out on his boat in the Channel to talk about people that have come here to work from, say, a European country or an African country or an Asian country, not through the spectacle of crossing the Channel or not through the spectacle of coming through the tunnel or whatever. It's kind of scary that it's okay to talk about people in that way. And just assume that you're going to trick the public to be like, oh yeah, this is actually what our illegal immigration policy is.
I think that is very much what this is. It's that Keir Starmer is hoping that the 10 o'clock news, people are going to turn it on. They're going to pick up his speech in which he's being cracked down on immigration. Net migration is going to come down. Island of strangers. People are going to hear that. Oh, he's getting tough on immigration. They're not actually going to go and read the 69-page white paper, which is actually probably a lot less radical than the rhetoric is making it sound. But like you said, that language has impacts. And I went and spoke to Nadia Whittome MP for Nottingham East yesterday, who was very concerned about the language that Starmer was using. Shall we hear from her?
Let's hear from her.
To be completely frank, my initial gut reaction was one of disgust. When I hear my party talking about, using rhetoric, echoing Nigel Farage, like being an island of strangers, untold damage, that is not a party that I recognise. That would not be out of place in a far-right party. We're seeing the right in politics scapegoating and demonising and dehumanising migrants and people seeking asylum, blaming them for the very real problems of a housing crisis, of public services that have been chronically underfunded over the last decade and a half. And instead of legitimising that narrative and giving it airtime, we should be calling it out, and we should be actually fixing the problems that people are worried about.
So that was Nadia Whittome, who was very concerned about the language. And she said quite clearly when I asked her, is this language being used because the Labour government are feeling the pressure of the popularity from reform? She quite clearly said, yes, that's definitely what this is. It's, a reactionary response to that. But as she also raised, you can't out-reform on these issues. And it kind of raises the question, who is this for?
Yep.
Who is this immigration policy for? Because it's not for, the traditional left wing of the party, people like Corbyn, even people like Starmer himself when he was running for leader. There was lots of clips going around on social media of Starmer back in 2019, 2020.
Kemi Badenoch was sharing them.
Was sharing them, where he was talking about the benefits of migration and the benefits of legal migration, where he's saying that we don't need to cut net migration because it's good for the economy, it's good for growth, which is not what he was saying yesterday. He was saying there's no evidence that net migration is good for growth. So you're not appealing to those people. You're not appealing to reform voters because you can't be tougher on immigration than reform, mainly because what reform is offering is fantasy. So who is this for?
Yeah. But also back to the language as well, calling it things like an experiment when he's asked about how you compare the Starmer line in 2020 to the Starmer line now. And the response being, well, it's clear now that the experiment has failed. The Conservative experiment of unfettered migration. Like, it's a normal part of a nation's tapestry to have people coming in and out and to be hospitable towards those people that come in and to hope that the people that go out come back at some point. To have this hostile attitude towards people that are like coming from countries that you would regard as friends and neighbors, rather than countries that in the media or in politics are portrayed as places that are war-torn, third world, dangerous. We can't trust the people from there. You should trust the people from there in the first place. But you're now talking about like Swedish people or like Greek people with that language. And yet, to your point of like, it's not appealing to reform voters. You can never be racist enough for these people. You know, like I'd imagine that Nigel Farage is struggling. I mean, in fact, he is struggling to be racist enough for the average reform voter. So if Farage can't do it, how is Keir Starmer going to do it? You know,
it's honestly just like embarrassing for Keir Starmer at this point to be like begging the right-wing media and begging these reform voters to like him. Like the way that he did this speech has gotten so much heat from the left of his party for it, because he's using language that is reminiscent, if not deliberate, of Enoch Powell, just for the Daily Mail to run the headline, Labour's taking us all for fools, and for the Sun to run a headline about how many small boats crossings there were where Starmer gave the speech.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like it is being interpreted by the right-wing media as a way of cracking down on illegal immigration. When it is, as you said earlier on, you look very simply into it, and it's about legal immigration. And it's also like the guys were talking about it yesterday about particularly when it came to social care, of how there is already a massive shortfall in staffing in social care, and then kind of closing the tap of immigration or preventing or slowing down how many people come in to work in that industry is then just going to put further pressure on the industry. But also, I was saying it in the office, the people that have been here for a long time, that have seen the political narratives around immigration, if you're an immigrant yourself, you've probably most likely felt dehumanized by any political conversation about migration in the last 15 years. Last year, you probably had a twinkle of hope about how the conversation was going to shift under a centre-left government. And then to see this kind of language around people like you and people in more precarious situations than you must be alienating to no end, to the point where you kind of think, okay, well, if the other end of the spectrum is now talking the same way as the guys that I didn't like for the last 15 years, what's the point in me staying in this country? The establishment hates me. I want to feel respected, and I have some sort of belonging and love for this country, but if the country doesn't love me back, why would I stay here and contribute my life and my taxes to it?
Should we talk about some of the reforms that will be targeting those people, some of the measures proposed?
Let's rattle through.
So I think, first of all, is the English language requirements, which you touched on earlier, which is they're going to raise basically the proficiency in English that you need, which I think what we're talking about here is people that are coming here on student or work visas. So it makes sense that if you're coming to work in the UK or study in the UK, that you would need some level of proficiency in English. Like, again, just for clarity, like, we're not talking about people that are coming here on like the Afghan visa, people that were fleeing war, or like the Ukraine visa, and people that are coming here as refugees. These people are coming because they have work visas or student visas.
However, I think it's still may be a rogue opinion, but I don't think it's a bad idea for anybody that's coming into any country to learn some sort of proficiency in the language of that country. Because again, it speeds up integration. It helps you assimilate into society. Whether you're a refugee or whether you are an economic immigrant, I don't think it's a bad idea either way for you to be learning English. I mean, countries like Germany do it, you know.
I think the other thing that we touched on was the ending of overseas recruitment for care workers. And we know from this white paper that the majority of the workers' visas are going out to the health and social care sector. So I think that's one of the things that's actually interesting about these reforms, is perhaps the most radical impact of them will be the knock-on effects they have. Not that they're ending the recruitment for care workers overseas themselves, but that they perhaps haven't thought then about how are they going to fill the gap then in care workers. I mean, Richard Tice had an interesting way to do it, which he was on
I was just thinking about
LBC saying that if unemployed people don't take jobs in social care, they should get their benefits cut.
Do you think they'd like to hear that?
Who's
them? Those guys. Roll the clip.
What we might need to have to say to people, look, actually, if you're on benefits, then maybe actually we need to train you in things like social care and get you into a really important job.
But if they don't want to do it, what are you going to do? Take the benefits away?
Then frankly, end of benefits. You can't make a lifestyle decision to sit on your backside at home watching telly whilst other people are going to work to pay your benefits. We have to have that discussion and say, if you can work, you should work. Social care work in the community is a vital part of our communities, and people have to understand that. I think we've got to be crystal clear about it.
There's something very 2010 about that clip. But it's also interesting how it's kind of yes-anding Labour policy. Like the Reform deputy is just going off the back of what Keir Starmer is proposing and saying, oh yeah, we're going to keep this and then go a little bit further. But it is also just, it's so 2010. It's so Benefit Street to be playing into that kind of rhetoric,
yeah.
you know?
The kind of like scrounger-esque rhetoric.
Yeah. They're still there. They're still amongst us, you know? Bizarre.
I think the other point that is important on the care worker and ending the recruitment is that in the white paper, Labour said to fill this gap, what they would do is improve paying conditions in the sector for workers, which I thought was quite a shocking thing to say, because essentially what you're saying then is that you're happy to have 2 tiers of workers' rights. One's for people that come over here on workers' visas as immigrants to the country, and one for your white British person.
Yep.
Even though already there are many white British people working in the social care sector, essentially you're happy for them to be on lower paying conditions than you know they should be.
Yeah. And what does it say as well for those people that work in the sector already, that they have not gotten a pay rise up until this point? Like the only thing that's giving them a pay rise is we want to get rid of all of the non-English people in the sector.
Exactly.
You know?
The other thing which you touched on was the increased residency before you can claim citizenship. So they want to increase it to 10 years of residency before you can claim citizenship. Removing Article 8, which is so they want to disapply Article 8, which is the ECHR's right to family life, from immigrants who have committed a crime in the UK. And often in the courts, that right to family life is used as an appeal for a reason why people who've committed a crime while on a visa should be allowed to stay in the UK. And they're proposing revoking that right for immigrants to the country. Nadia Whittome was very concerned about that because of the precedent it sets. When you're allowed to start disapplying certain aspects of human rights from immigrants, that is a slippery slope and quite a concerning precedent, she was arguing. And then the final group that this really applies to is students and student visas. They're concerned about how many student visas are being given out and specifically at what institutions. I can't remember the wording that they used exactly, but basically they were saying that at the UK's top institutions, the applicants for international students has actually decreased by 7%. But at the institutions that perhaps have lower entry requirements to get in, they've increased by 49%. Obviously, the knock-on effect of this is funding for the universities, because a lot of universities now and the sector relies on international students. So their question will be, well, where are we getting funding from if you're cracking down on how many students can come and study with us?
I also wonder how much of the kind of the transfer from top universities to second tier university, for want of a better word, is to do with the change in non-EU and EU fees. EU fees in 2021, I think. It changed from it's now international fees for EU students in the UK. And obviously, in the UK, some universities charge a lot more than other universities for a year of a course. And I'd wonder if obviously you've got like the big hitters of the like East Asian American students in the UK, and South Asian students as well. But I mean, it was still a big destination for European students to come to the UK to study in Oxbridge or wherever, in Russell Group universities. So I'd wonder if that shift is down to Brexit. Well, we could blame everything on Brexit, actually, couldn't we, Laura? But I'd say there's a portion there that has to do with that.
Mm-hmm. I think also, if you're even talking about Brexit, it is kind of mad that Nigel Farage, the man who promised that migration to this country was going to be cut drastically by leaving the European Union, is now the same man that's saying that, well, if you vote for reform, we'll cut it drastically for the Europe. We'll cut migration drastically. And it's like, he promised to do it the first time and it didn't happen. I'm just doing it again.
Yeah. Oh, it's only because I'm not in charge. On the student thing as well, though, I think it's interesting to remember that in last year's immigration numbers was when the headcount of students was included in the immigration numbers, which resulted in a big increase. I mean, there was an increase anyway, but a very significant increase in inward migration into the UK. And so I'd wonder if, had there not been a change in how inward migration was measured, would students be part of the white paper whatsoever?
I think it's interesting as well, because one of the issues that the Labour government seemed to have with the workers' visas and the students' visas was this idea of dependence. And one of the things they really want to, quote unquote, crack down on is the bringing over of dependents with students or with workers. The other thing around language that I find interesting in this white paper is the difference between high skill and low skill work, and how Labour want to increase migration amongst high skill workers and decrease it amongst low skill. And in low skill they've included things like health and care work. But I think that's interesting, because surely those are the exact skills that we need in this country. Like, do we really need more consultants and wealth managers, or do we need more care workers? And also, what's more valuable and productive for the economy?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of taking every aspect of the well-being of a society in complete isolation from one another. Obviously, health and care are very important jobs. There is no high skill and low skill in any of these things. And also to discount, I mean, actually, on this point, Jeremy Corbyn made a good point in Parliament yesterday. Shall we listen to it?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Home Secretary explain why, in the introduction of this white paper, the language of Enoch Powell was used by the Prime Minister? There's been no speaking up about the enormous value of migration to this country that's kept our NHS running, our education service running, and so much more, and that there are already 130,000 vacancies in the care sector. Does anything in her white paper do anything to improve community relations or deal with the now labour shortage within the NHS and the care service? Or is it all about trying to please these people who unfortunately sit in front of me?
Well, what I would just say to the honourable member is, I think at the very beginning of my statement to this House, I talked about the importance of those who come to work in our NHS, those who come to serve in our armed forces, those who come to work in constituencies like mine, in coal mining jobs, those who come sometimes to do some of the most difficult jobs of all. But it's because migration is important that it needs to be controlled and managed. And we need to tackle the underlying problems in the labour market. So for net migration to quadruple in the space of 4 years, at the same time as domestic training is being cut, at the same time as we haven't had the support for the skills and training in the UK, I think shows a system that just is not working. We have to tackle those training and skills shortages alongside bringing net migration down.
So to that point, it is just taking in isolation one thing, i.e. migration, and saying cutting migration is going to have no tangible impact on any of the other aspects of British society. We're going to be able to plug the gaps in care, health, whatever it might be, with something. You know, they're not saying what the other thing is. They're just saying, well, we're allowing people in for these high-skilled jobs, the nuclear scientists, the tech bros, the KPMG consultants. But then don't worry about the NHS. People will work in that. We'll find someone to work in that. Maybe the people that they're cutting PIP from are going to start working in the NHS.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll hire Deloitte to do some consultancy and they'll tell us what to do.
We'll just get rid of 5 hospitals and increase capacity in none of them, and increase staffing in none of them. And it's all going to work out fine. We're still going to reduce the waiting list. How? Because the assisted dying bill is coming through.
Oh, no. It is interesting, though, Jeremy Corbyn pointing and saying you're speaking to these people, because the fact that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, went on GB News as her first interview about this is so telling about the people they're trying to reach with this message. And it is not the people that voted them into power that gave them the mandate to govern. It's not those people they're trying to speak to. And I think what's interesting as well is I went to Birmingham on Thursday to go to the mega picket, which is basically the bin workers in Birmingham are on about their 11th week now of an all-out strike over pay and conditions after Birmingham Council's bankruptcy. And they are furious at Labour. And it was quite a stark difference to how they were 4 weeks ago when I went up just before they entered into talks that have now failed.
Yeah.
And they were quite positive about the Labour government's role in this then, saying they were listening, they are facilitating these negotiations. But now that has completely changed. They were saying that they feel abandoned by the Labour government. They were furious at Angela Rayner, who they said had forgotten her trade union roots. And she had come to Birmingham to meet with the council leader, and he'd taken her on a tour of all the
scabs
bins.
as well, right?
Yeah, and and a tour of all the bins piling up. And she hadn't gone to the picket line and she hadn't spoken to workers. And I met bin men who said that they were going to vote reform and that Nigel Farage is would be the Prime Minister of the working man and not Keir Starmer. And I think if Labour are losing their base at such a rate like this, and they're losing it because of things like PIP cuts and winter fuel payments, they're not losing it because of their lax immigration policy. When you talk to people who are angry at Labour, they're angry over those things.
It's, again, as we said at the beginning, you are not gaining votes. Like, could you imagine if it's like there's this undercurrent of Green voter that's actually vehemently anti-immigration, and there's just a surge from Green to Labour in the next election because of this mysterious blob of people that Labour have somehow expertly identified and brought them over. Because it's not the Conservatives, it's not Reform. And yeah, like it was a really interesting piece that you did last week. And it kind of strikes to the point that we've been saying ad nauseum on this podcast, that it does not matter the radical right policies of reform when it comes to migration, when it comes to fracking, when it comes to any of those things. When you are in a state of precarity and the people that you think are, or the people that you've been led to believe for your entire life represent you politically, are now turning their backs on you, it does not matter what the alternative is saying that you disagree with. It matters what you agree with. And yes, Nigel Farage has got no power in, well, I mean, as the weeks go on, we might see something more of kind of how they operate in the councils that they now run. But at the moment, he's all things to all people. And so it doesn't matter what he says about the things that you disagree with. It's what he says that you do agree with. And if you're a striking worker and he says that he would get a fair deal for you, you're going to believe him. Why wouldn't you believe him?
Because Labour aren't.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that's how they feel.
Exactly. The people that are meant to represent you don't represent you. So who do you turn to?
And it just again goes back to who are Labour doing this for and for what? You will never appeal to the people that are Reform voters for Nigel Farage. You're turning your back on the base that voted you in. Why are the Labour government afraid to be a Labour government? It makes no sense.
What are we now? Shall we wrap?
Should we wrap it up there?
Yeah. Let's wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Cool. See you in the Reddit.
See you in the Reddit.
And the trifecta will be back tomorrow.
They sure will do for PMQs.
Bye-bye.